And my family would be like, really like Data. He really likes Star Trek. You don't have to act like him.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 74, recorded February 2023. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan, we hear their fandom story, and we try to figure out what this fandom is all about and why we love the show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 74. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. And here is your spoiler warning, people. As we recorded this, we were at the end of Prodigy Season 1, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the plainly popular, painfully pragmatic, principally phlegmatic M5 Multitronic unit. Say hello, M5.
The M5 stands by.
Let's take a look at the announcements.
Announcements posted.
This podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is just to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We are on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. There is a lot of lightly edited bonus material and outtakes at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy it, or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest faces my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they have to give us their answer. And after each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls, where you can have your say. Let's look at the questions from episode 72 with guest Sabrina Wood and see how it went. Game night. Tongo, Caddiscot, or Chula. Sabrina opted for the Caddiscot, and so did the Twitter tweets for a total of 56%. Tongo got 44, and Chula got sent all the way back to the first shap with 0%. Which of these is the better vacation spot, Turkana 4 or Tars Lamora? Sabrina picked Tars Lamora, but 100% of the poll respondents picked Turkana 4. Which cafe for coffee, the Café des Artistes, Madeline's Cafe, or the Celestial Cafe? Picard's favorite spot got 50% and the vote of my guest. The Celestial Cafe got 33% and Madeline's only got 17%. Choose your own hologram advisor for your ship. Is it going to be Hologram Janeway, Hologram Picard, or Hologram Sisko? Sabrina wanted that Hologram Sisko's advice, but the poll people picked Janeway by 50%, with 30% for Picard and Sisko at 20%. And finally, worst naked surprise in your quarters, Assault Vampire, a Gorn, or a Medusan. My guest and the poll respondents agreed that a Medusan would be the worst. It was 50 for that one, the Assault Vampire at 31, and the Gorn at 19. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, you can send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. And speaking of emailing me, I have an email here from frequent correspondent Sandy, who always lets me have her feedback in a very candid way, which I appreciate. This time, Sandy wanted to know if I had ever tried to get Mrs. Trek Profiles into Star Trek. I couldn't remember, actually, if I'd answered this one on the show, so I will share some facts. I tried a few episodes of Star Trek with Mrs. Trek Profiles, and she did not like any of them. In fact, the only sci-fi movie she ever liked was Galaxy Quest. And since I often say that's one of the best Star Trek films, I will take that as a victory. That's it for announcements. Let's get to it. M5, let's start the show.
Activating show transmission.
Her favorite characters are Data and Q. She loves the Klingons and the 1701D2. She's from Dallas, Texas, North America, Earth, and Sector 001. It's Brianne Leeson. Welcome, Brianne, and thank you for being on the podcast.
Hey, thank you.
Brianne, are you a Star Trek fan?
I am a Star Trek fan, through and through.
And when did you decide that you're a Star Trek fan?
I don't know that I actually had the opportunity to make a decision because it was just always on from my earliest recollection and my earliest memory of being cognizant of what the television was.
So you come from a family of Star Trek watchers then?
Yes, on both sides I did, and it was just on. Like some rerun of it was on. I'm told my biological father would stay up late and with his VHS record all of the reruns. And I remember seeing all of those tapes for the entire original series that he had stayed up late to record. So that's the level of Trekkie sort of household I was born into.
Nice, nice. And so the first series that you were aware of was original series?
No, not so much. Like it was on sometimes if someone would want to actually pop in a tape and do it. When I was a little kid, early 90s, it was Next Gen was on in some capacity, often in syndication, and Deep Space Nine was new. And then the one that I was most aware of as it was happening and most jazzed about and would sit down every night was probably Voyager.
Okay, so this was like the mid-90s, somewhere around there.
Early 90s to mid-90s, but the first one I remember sitting down for new episodes was Voyager. I think as a little kid, I couldn't fully appreciate Deep Space Nine, because as a little kid, it's like, politics, religion, I don't... Deep concepts that have allegories in the real world, or allegories for the real world. I'm a kid, I can't appreciate that yet, but it has become higher up on my Star Trek tiers as an adult.
And so you were watching Voyager as it came out. Did you go back and rewatch all the older stuff on tape or whatever methods were available to you at the time?
I did. I hit up the tapes, and then as it is, I think, at least in the United States, I know there is some, even in streaming, something is playing the original series at some point in the day. So there is, I forget, a local station would play the original series very early in the morning. And I would watch those if I was up. And I was an only child with a TV in my room, so if I couldn't sleep. Sometimes I set an alarm for Star Trek time, too, I'm remembering. Because I was like, I don't have to go anywhere in the morning.
So as we sit here in 2023, there's 800 and something canonical hours or episodes of Star Trek, depending on how you count it. Have you seen it all?
You know, I think the only things I'm behind on are a couple current things. So I have some Prodigy left to watch. I think I've watched about half of what's available on Paramount. I'm trying to picture my app in my head. And I think just the last few episodes of the most recent season of Discovery. But other than that, yeah, at some point I've seen it all.
So you are a completist. So these days when you're watching Star Trek, how do you watch Star Trek? Do you watch it on like a little personal device, like a phone or a tablet? You got like a big theater room or what do you do?
No big theater room. Just, it's usually one of my comfort things is rewatching comfort shows. So often while I'm getting work done that doesn't require my room to be quiet, I will have Star Trek, or it's usually some Star Trek playing in the background. It's background noise for life. So
so there will always be Star Trek on at some point during your day. On your journey in your Star Trek fandom, have you been collecting anything along the way?
I have. I worked at and then subsequently managed a comic book store for about 6 years, and we would get old collections of things in. So as a kid, I would try to get my hands on any Star Trek novels I could, because that's the thing I was most likely to have access to. And, you know, parents are like, yeah, I'll buy you a book. An action figure, not so much, but they're like, yeah, I'll get you a book. A book is fine. But when I had my own money to spend and I was at the comic book store, I started collecting the old Gold Key comics.
Oh, those are wild.
Those are wild. Because one of my jobs was working back issues, and Star Trek comics, for the most part, are pretty inexpensive for older back issues. So, you know, for anyone who wants to collect vintage comics, Star Trek ones are pretty reasonable to go back and try to collect. But there are just so many of them. So I have quite a bit of them. I did have a spreadsheet to make sure I wasn't double buying things that I haven't updated in a while and I should go look at. But I think I'm shy about 10 of them last I checked. But yeah, there are all sorts of goodies I would get in there. I have old Star Trek kids book. It's the Prisoner of Vega kids book with some wild art. I've gotten older Star Trek ornaments from the Hallmark collection stuff that they're just like,
Nice.
it's $3. It's fine. Just take it. There was just an understanding that if it was a Star Trek thing, you put it in a pile for Brianne first. She'll tell you if she has it already or doesn't want it or anything. And then you can work it to go put it out on the shelf.
What's your most prized Star Trek item?
Probably not really an item, but my tattoo. It was my second tattoo I ever got. It's still one of my largest tattoos. But there is a big command delta with roses around it done in an American traditional style on my thigh. And that one was fun. I've gotten many tattoos since then, but I either get people very excitedly looking at my tattoo going, "Ooh, who's your favorite captain?" without any introduction, which I love. Like, yes, help me with this social situation and filter it through Star Trek. Or, since I'm in Texas, I don't know why, but I get people going, "Wow, you really like the Dallas Cowboys, don't you?" And I'm like, no, I don't know a single thing other than they're from here.
They're the sports ball team.
Yeah. Wrong treat. That's not it at all. Different kind of nerd.
Go ahead and send me photos of that, and I will gladly put that up on the show notes page up at trekprofiles.com because my listeners love that sort of stuff. Is it something that was so big you had to have it done in multiple sittings, or was it all done in one sitting?
It was all done in one sitting, but this is one place where my autism is a big benefit. I'm autistic, and my pain tolerance is such that I fall asleep during all of my tattoos, inevitably. So I fell asleep while getting this one, and it took 4.5 hours. It was pretty quick because American traditional is pretty blocky lines. But yeah, it was one session. I had some guys in the tattoo shop were like, "Put some tribbles on it. Can we put tribbles on it?" And I'm like, that's a good idea, but I don't know right now. So I might get tribbles added later.
Yeah, it might be too busy.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to a Star Trek or sci-fi convention?
I have never been to a Trek convention, and I very much want to. I've been to comic conventions, which weren't specifically sci-fi, but comic conventions I've been to strictly because that was work for a long time, and there is always some good Star Trek representation at those. Like, I'm never disappointed. There's always, no matter what kind of nerdy convention there is, there will be some sort of Star Trek representation. But no, I would love to go to like a Star Trek convention proper, like for strictly Star Trek. That's definitely on my bucket list.
Well, you have to come to Vegas one of the years and go to the one that's in August.
Yeah, that's the dream. I'm like, if I'm going to go to a Star Trek convention, I'm going to do it right. And Vegas is the top. I've already told my partners, like, if you want to surprise me for a milestone birthday, this is the perfect opportunity.
You know, I think that as far as marketing those conventions, they really only have to sell one convention ticket, and it's the first one. Because then you're like, I have to come back. Yeah. I mean, we've heard this on Trek Profile so many times where people are like, yeah, I thought, it's like it's the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. I have to buy a ticket for that. You know, this will be the first time I'll go. It'll be one and done. And then they're like, got to come back every year. And then it's like, year 7 and they're still coming back. It's fantastic. Are you a cosplayer at all?
I am not. I have mad respect for anyone who has the creativity and patience for that, but I am not a cosplayer. I think the fact that conventions for me were so often not like, this is a for pleasure thing I'm going. It was, this is also part of work thing. For a while, I did have my sort of backup. If I don't have a Halloween costume picked out in time, at least I know I have my Starfleet uniform that I can wear. But I lost quite a bit of weight several years ago, and now it doesn't fit. So I am in the market for this is my Starfleet uniform backup Halloween costume that I always know I can wear. So I need to get one.
Which era uniform was it that you had?
It was original series, and I had actually sewn, so mild cosplaying. It was original series, and I had gotten one of the dresses, and I sewed on my own stripes to make it captain onto the sleeves because I was like, it's a little silly. I cannot get a captain dress. I will make my own.
So you got the TOS dress and you made it a captain's version.
Yeah, I made it a captain's version. I found my own ribbon to try to match it as well as I could and did that around the sleeves.
That's wonderful. Well, if you have an old photo of yourself in that, go ahead and send it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have
we'd love to put all that up and celebrate that. So the M5 tells me that you are on a fiction podcast where you're doing some acting, and I understand that you write for that. Is that true?
Yes, I am the writer. I write all of it. I'm a voice actor on it. I'm also a voice actor on the podcast Wake of Corrosion, but my show is Today's Lucky Winner. We've been doing that since 2020. So I write it. I voice one of the main characters. It is a supernatural comedy audio drama. I've heard it called Raunchy Stoner Buffy before. If that's kind of your thing. I voice a Grim Reaper who is stoned a lot of the time and is extremely horny a lot of the time, and her foil is human who is autistic and ace and a Trekkie. So that character, much like me, has some of the same opinions on what the best Star Trek characters are as I do.
Give me some of that Grim Reaper. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, the Grim Reaper is basically just me with more energy. So I sound a little less like Daria, and she does a lot of yelling, and I didn't want to make that one too complicated because I'd be voicing her a lot, but it is a small cast. We don't get new people to come do voices, so I do a lot of voices quite often. So I voice a demon who talks like this a lot of the time. Her name is Grakna, and she just calls everyone sugar and honey bun and sweet cakes and stuff. And then I also voice a German vampire character on there named Sabina, and she's very into the fitness training, and that's the voice I do for her. So yeah, we do a lot of voices on the show because there are only 5 of us.
Oh, that's wonderful. The M5 tells me that I should ask you if your love of Star Trek influenced how you write the show.
Absolutely did. I grew up in a religious fundamentalist home where I don't know what they got from watching Star Trek, really. I don't know what they were getting, but I'm glad they had it on because that is what taught me that there were other people out there like me who might not fit in where they belong, but the things that made me different were things that made me good. And if we were all the same, then we would never get anything done because that's what matters. So in writing my show, I try to create a world where everyone's differences not only are tolerated, but they're cherished. And that's part of why they're valued so much. So that's how Star Trek has influenced me. Because I think if I could see that, hey, there's nothing wrong with you, like you have inherent value, I want to do that for someone else with anything I'm writing.
Well, since we're on the topic of your show, why don't you go ahead and tell people right quick where they can find it?
Yeah, you can find Today's Lucky Winner wherever you get your podcasts, and we're on social media at the handle at Lucky Winner Show.
Well, I think we should talk about some episodes. Are you game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start with a TNG episode, Peak Performance. This is Season 2, Episode 21. This, of course, is the War Games episode where we have Master Strategist Kolrami, the Stratagema guy. We have the Hathaway and pitting Riker against Picard in a War Game simulation. Now, people remember this episode. I think it's very memeable, of course, especially Kolrami. But what I want to know from you, Brianne, is why is this episode meaningful and or powerful to you? What lessons did it teach you?
I think the quote that most people take away from that episode is Picard telling Data, like, it is possible to commit no mistakes and still fail. That's not weakness, that's life. And that is something that as an undiagnosed autistic kid who felt like I kept messing up at being human, much like Data feels all of the time, that sometimes I could do everything right and I would not necessarily succeed in something, and that didn't mean there was anything wrong with me, and that didn't mean I didn't try hard. And I think the point in the episode where Data's like, you know, I went to go play Stratagema again, and instead of trying to win, I just tried to play as long as I could. Like, instead of trying harder, I tried different. Because I didn't do anything wrong that time, it just wasn't right for this scenario. And I think that concept stuck with me, so, like, now in life when I am trying something and I've done everything right and it still doesn't work out, I'm not like, oh, that was my fault. I did something bad. No, it's like, let me approach it differently. Because I know I tried my hardest. Let me come at this from a different angle. Because there's probably a different way where I can try to get the same thing done. And even if I can't get it done, it's like, hey, that's life. Sometimes it happens. And when you're growing up in a home where failure is not really an option, it's nice to hear my favorite captain saying like, hey, you did your best. You can do everything right according to the book, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's okay.
So that's like a personal maxim for you, or something that you go back to in your head to really think about, and when you're reflecting upon your own performance in a particular situation, that's something that gives you comfort. Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, it does. Like, it's okay. You did your best, and I think it also just informs where I go from there. It's like, all right, well, let's try something different. Like Data did. He's like, I was trying to win, and I didn't. So I just tried to play as long as I could, and he gave up. So I won strategy, but technically, but I just, my goals were different than his. I think that is a maxim that, like, of all the quotes in Star Trek, I think that's one that I'm very likely to get tattooed on my person if we're going to get dialogue tattooed.
I think it's one of the stories I hear quite frequently, actually, on Trek Profiles, that people took something from an episode that they saw, maybe even when they were quite young, and it just sort of germinated, and at some point it led them to an insight about their life, or a life that they might aspire to have, or some standard that they want to set for themselves that they don't feel like they're reaching just yet. And it gives them the opportunity to reach.
Yeah.
Which I think is really a testament to the show.
Yeah. And it wasn't like a heavy-handed message either. It's very much like, no, this is an episode about war games. I don't think it was heavy-handed with that. I think it was just so well done that, yeah, I remember watching it as a kid, and it's like, oh, if I do everything right and I still don't get it, I'm gonna be okay. Picard told me I am, and I trust him.
One should always trust Picard. So speaking of trusting Picard, let's talk about a different episode. Let's talk about The Measure of a Man. This is Season 2, Episode 9. So we're still in Season 2 of TNG here. And of course, this is the one that we have the court case about Data's rights to be disassembled or not. Now, I will tell you right now, Brianne, and I think we talked about this in the pre-show, that there are some episodes that come up a lot on Trek Profiles. So this is one of them. So I'm looking for your particular interpretation as to why this episode spoke to you personally, what lessons you took from it, and how it's affected your life.
As a kid, I wasn't diagnosed as autistic until I was an adult. But as a kid, very often, especially growing up in a fundamentalist household, I did not have the autonomy that I saw the other kids around me have. And even if I said, well, what if I don't want to do that? It wasn't an option. So there would be social things, social norms, other things that I was not programmed to do that I would get told, like, no, you need to do that. Everyone, like, I'm older than you. I'm an authority. I'm telling you, you need to do that. And I think, I mean, I know the listeners can't see, but I think this episode might be the seed that planted my punk aesthetic. Because Data's like, no, I don't care who you are. I'm not going to let you do this. And as an autistic person too, Data, to me, as an autistic person, as a kid, I always was like, Data does have feelings. Why does he think he doesn't have them? He's showing them differently. Like, he just shows his feelings differently. And I always really identified with him. And my family would be like, really like Data. He really likes Star Trek. You don't have to act like him. And I'm like, I'm not trying to. That's just me. So seeing an episode where not only is Data saying, no, I have autonomy. I'm who I am, and I can consent or not consent to things. I am a full person, even if I don't know what that means. Not only to have that, but also the support of people around him who, like, rally around him and say, no, Data, we're going to support Data. He might not be the same as us. There might be something fundamentally different about his programming. And that's really what being autistic is. Like, I run on a different operating system than the non-autistic people around me.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people are angry that my operating system can't do certain things as well as theirs. But seeing the crew rally around Data and say, like, it doesn't matter. At his core, he's still, somehow there's something about him that is still, in essence, as human as you or I. So I think that episode also, it introduced to me the idea of you can say no to authority figures if they're asking you to do something that is against your own autonomy or against your ethics. But I also think it taught me sort of the friendships I deserve.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I may be the weird one who doesn't know what to do when you're crying, but you still love me and you're going to show up for me and do really difficult things, like especially with Riker, who had to argue against Data being sentient and being a person. I love at the end that Data's like, no, you did the hardest thing, and I won't forget that. You did something extremely hard that was against your programming, Riker, and I won't forget it. So ultimately for me, I think that episode planted the seeds of me saying, like, authority is earned. It's not inherent. I don't have to say yes to something because someone is above me, especially if it violates my autonomy and my decision making. But I think also it taught me you deserve people who, even if you are different from them, are still going to rally around and say, but ultimately you're still human and you're still one of us. So that episode, I don't think I realized why I liked it so much as a kid, but going back after I got diagnosed, I was like, oh, all of my favorite Data episodes are because of that. That's why.
It's interesting you bring that up. It's I will say it's a story that we have heard here on Truck Profiles before. I'm particularly thinking of an episode that I did with Janae Fowler, where she had a very similar story. She was raised in a cult, and and I mean a full-on culty, a very culty cult. And the only television show that her parents would let her watch was Star Trek. And that's what led her to...
Yeah, it's wild, too.
Yeah, it's what led her to question the cult. Now she's anathematized from her own family, so she's out on her own. So that was a very interesting and heartbreaking in many ways episode. So there'll be a link up to that in the show notes as well. If people are interested, they can go back and listen to that. So we're on the subject of Data, and I'd like to continue on that topic since we're in TNG land talking about everyone's favorite android. Let's talk about Data's Day, TNG, Season 4, Episode 11. This, of course, is the Slice of Life episode with Data, and we also have the O'Brien-Keiko marriage ceremony, which Data is, of course, involved in. So tell me, what about this particular episode is interesting to you? Is it more of the identification with Data, or is there some new lesson we can glean from this one that we haven't heard from the other two?
This one, I think, is probably one of the most effective ways that I can explain to a non-autistic person what I do in order to try to be as good of a friend as possible to them.
Okay.
And this episode, to me, shows Data's feelings. So for me, when I care about someone, I use this phrase even outside of the Data context, I download all the information I can about things that are important to them, whether that be by Googling and doing other stuff. And then I try to apply that because I care about them and I know it's something they care about. So seeing how much Data is trying to collect all of this information, which is what I do for social situations. I have to Google what I'm expected to do at certain things or in certain social interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And like Data reading books about what marriage means in different cultures and learning to dance, but not getting specific enough about the type of dance and learning tap. And I also used to tap dance competitively. So that's another layer. But
oh, goodness.
Yeah. It's another reason I love this episode. I tap danced since I was really little kid. But I go through all of this to show my friends I love them. And then I think it shows that when Data is messing up, his intentions were good. So I think like when he's like, okay, well, Keiko says she doesn't want to get married and that calling off the wedding will make her happy. And Miles loves her. And his main goal is to see Keiko be happy. So when I tell him that she's canceling the wedding because that'll make her happy, that should make Miles happy because ultimately he wants Keiko's happiness. So for me, social situations, I have to run them through that same sort of logic puzzle and whatever subroutine I have for that situation to try to figure them out, missing the social cue of, hey, someone might say they want to call it off and not really want to call it off, because most people don't literally mean what they're saying in the very literal sense all of the time. So it's a way that I have my girlfriends, and I have two partners. One's autistic, my girlfriend is not. And I had her watch Data's Day, and I'm like, this is what I do for all the people I love. I do this kind of stuff for the people I love all of the time. I think going back and watching that, I, as a kid and even part of adulthood, didn't understand that some of his situations were supposed to be charming, funny, slice of life stuff where he kind of goofed up after trying. To me, it looked like a collection of him just being social, doing things I thought were social skills and kind of getting them right and kind of messing them up. It doesn't read the same to me when I didn't know that everyone didn't operate that way. So, like, him making the jokes, and he's like, Jordy, you lunkhead. Because he's like, I've heard people exchange friendly jibes with each other, and I'm trying it out. And that's another, like, his relationship with Jordy, too, is another way that I was it was sort of a subliminal message of how I deserve to have my friendships be. So even if I tried to do the social thing that didn't come naturally to me, didn't come instinctually, that I had to intellectually figure out, and I kind of messed it up, this episode shows me I deserve people like Jordy who are like, hey, good try. Here are some parameters to make sure you don't say that to the captain, okay? Like, I appreciate you trying. Great job. Let me give you some more parameters so you understand this better. Instead of going, what are you doing? That sounded so weird, which is what autistic people get told a lot when we're trying to participate in something like that. Yeah, for me, that episode it was different when I was younger, and I didn't know why. I didn't understand why it was supposed to be funny in certain parts, and now as an adult, I'm like, okay, I get it. But watching it now, it's like, this is how I show my friends I love them. And this is Data loving all of his friends very, very, very much for the whole day. And something about the fact that he spends so much energy, what he thinks he's spending the energy to try to be more human. But I think that whole episode to me is him spending the energy to show his friends how much he loves them.
I think one of the interesting things about how people interact with Data is that in the episode, they're trying to elevate him, and it's just a matter of them approaching the situation with positive intent, right? Mm-hmm. Data, that was not the best thing to say. Try this instead, right? And it's not because they're trying to cut him down. You know, you're an idiot, Data. Yeah. Don't say these things. Don't be foolish. You know, they're trying to help him out, right? And they have good intention, and that's clear in the episode. And I think that is also helpful for Data because he's willing to accept it. If people came and talked to him rudely, he may interpret that, you know, as like, I am a subroutine is alerting me that you are being what is called snarky.
Yeah.
And therefore I will now discount by 80% everything you say.
Yeah. And the one thing I like is that they're not asking Data to change. They're just saying, if you're wanting to try that again, here's why that doesn't quite work. And here's why there's not really a right or wrong way to do that. And I don't know why they don't tap dance at weddings, Data. I wish I did, but here's a dance you will do at weddings.
It's something very interesting that you bring up that I just want to spend half a second talking about, which is that in any organizational structure, whether it's a business, whether it's a gardening club, or whether it's a starship, you have people whose primary responsibilities are with the technology or the equipment. Or in Data's case, right, he's interfacing mostly with the panel. He's performing tasks, right? The majority of his work is not necessarily face-to-face with the other crew members, but it's working on specific tasks. And he might be very well suited to that. But as we learn in other episodes, eventually he'll want to move up and have a command. And as you move up in those organizations, you're getting further away from actually dealing with the technology and the equipment, or maybe clients or customers, and now you're dealing with other people in the organization, right? And so your job becomes more face-to-face and less with you and the equipment or you and the computer, and it's more about dealing with the other humans. So for him to interface successfully at those higher levels, he's got to learn those skills if he wants to do that. If he wants to go down that road, he can say, no, I'm happy doing this. And, that's great. So you can specialize in that. But if you want to do this other thing, you're going to have a starship full of mostly human beings, because let's face it, Starfleet seems to be mostly humans, right? You got to learn how to deal with those people.
Yeah. And the thing I would also like to delineate too about the way they treat informing him of those things. So autistic people, we do a thing called autistic masking. And that is something that I got missed until adulthood because I was very good at it. But it is where we alter as much as we can and create a lot of, subroutines essentially for pretending to be not autistic. And a lot of the things that people chalk up to, well, this is a skill you have to learn, are things that are so detrimental to our mental health that it increases our suicide rate. A recent study showed that it can take 14 years off of our lives. Our average life expectancy is only 36, and that is a huge contributing factor. And one of the things about workplaces is that if you don't know stuff about, we understand social hierarchies because we have to learn them. We don't inherently interpret them as instinctually as someone else might. So the thing I always appreciate is that Data is not being told, hey, you're going to have to start acting less weird if you're going to take command. You're going to have to do all this stuff. These are skills you have to learn. No, Data can say, hey, I'm getting the sense that because of your tone and your facial expression, you might be feeling this. And Data can say, my apologies, I've misunderstood you. So a lot of things that when you're an autistic person masking, I don't know how often I've masked, I have no idea what's going on. Why is this person upset? I can't point out that they're upset. I know that'll make them more upset. And you're running all of these subroutines all the time. So the thing I truly like is that Data is not told to be someone else, that he's given this information not to say, hey, change, be different. If you're going to be command, this is how you understand how the people around you are operating. We're not saying you need to change, Data. We love you the way you are. But understand this is how they operate. So for me as an autistic person, understanding how non-autistic people operate, sometimes I just use that to be a little stinker. Because it's like, oh, now I know. Now I know why you're doing that. Which...
As you've cracked the code.
Yeah. Sometimes I figure it out and I'm like, I know you don't care how I'm doing. I don't know why you would ask me if you didn't, but I figured it out and you don't.
All right, let's move into a different era of Star Trek. Let's talk about some new Star Trek that at the same time is very old Star Trek. Let's talk about Strange New Worlds, and let's talk about the Elysian Kingdom. This, of course, is the holodeck episode that we have in Strange New Worlds, where all of a sudden we're all wearing costumes and a Ren Fair suddenly erupted onto the Starship Enterprise. So tell me what's going on with this particular episode. Why is it special and or notable to you?
I think it's probably up there as one of my new favorite of all time, largely because it is silly Star Trek, which I enjoy. I like it when Star Trek gets a little silly. But in the same episode, it takes me from laughing hysterically to openly weeping within the same episode. And it does it all in the confines of a single episode of Star Trek. And it was fun and it was poignant, and the costuming itself was brilliant. I think some of my favorite original series things are where it's like, well, we had access to these Napoleonic French military uniforms from this other soundstage, so let's work that into an episode so we don't have to pay for anything. Like, that's the kind of vibe I like. But I like that they're like, well, what if we just made the Ren Fair costumes and made them well? So I think it plays into the era and how Star Trek can be funny. Star Trek can be very funny. I was losing it at Pike in that episode. Just the complete change, and then it was so poignant, and it made me care so much. And yeah, I was just weeping by the end. I had to pause it. I was like, I need to get it together before I can finish this, because I can't hear Star Trek over my crying.
It was definitely a marvelous episode, and I really enjoyed seeing the actors just go nuts and just do some wildly crazy things. And I tend to enjoy it in Star Trek when you get to see like the more serious character get to do something a little nutty. You know, I enjoy seeing the actors get to stretch and do something different. So that always pleases me. And I just thought it was delightful and really, really liked it. Because I always like the episodes that really change things up.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Like Star Trek not only has wonderful world building, but it's also an extremely fun sandbox where you can tell so many different and fun stories. And I think I always appreciate it when they decide to get weird with something and have fun with it. Like, I'm a sucker for holodeck episodes in general. Like, it's hard. I think one of my comfort episodes of Voyager is Bride of Chaotica. I like it when they use the very weird sort of places they've given themselves to play while still telling a Star Trek story. It's so fun.
Yeah, I noticed, though, that some of these episodes have a tendency to polarize. One that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head is, I remember sort of the name, but I'll slaughter it if I do it from memory. But it's the Peanut Hamper Lower Decks episode that was all about her. And there are some people who are like, this is the single greatest thing I've seen. And some people like it is the single worst thing that's ever been in Star Trek. You know, it's like it has this barbell shaped distribution, right? Where some people thought it was amazing and some people like, you know, burn it with fire. I admit, I enjoyed
it. I had to pause it. I was laughing so hard at certain points. Yeah, I loved it. It didn't feel Star Trek the entire time. I will give them that. It could have been any very weird, funny, animated show at certain points, but I love that one. I like the silly ones.
Yeah, I think the fact that it was very silly helped make it go down easier for me. By contrast, as we record this, I've been doing a live tweet rewatch of Star Trek for several years. And so I'm, watching the episodes, taking screenshots, tweeting my opinion about various things. And I've been doing this for a long time. And I'm down to my last couple episodes before I finish the grand rewatch. And I just got through those In a Mirror Darkly, the two Mirror Universe episodes from the end of Enterprise Season 4. And I will tell you, I did not like them at all. Did not. And I just got done saying how I love it when they just do something wildly different, right? But the problem was it took itself very seriously, like a very serious episode of Star Trek. And
so seriously.
And I was just not digging that at all because I was like, I don't care about any of these people. They're all terrible. I mean, they're murderous psychopaths, right?
Yeah.
I'm just not into that, Whereas if it had been like a comedic episode, I probably would have liked it better.
Yeah.
But that was just me. Let's move on and let's return and talk about some Star Trek Voyager. Definitely a very interesting episode. I don't think it's actually come up on Trek Profiles before. I'd have to check my notes about that. But let's talk about Star Trek Voyager, Season 7, Episode 7, Body and Soul. So this, of course, is the one where the Doctor has to hide his personality inside 7 of 9. Meanwhile, Tuvok has uncontrollable horniness due to the Ponfar. So please tell me what is particularly notable in this episode for you? What lessons did it teach you? How did it affect you?
As a kid, I thought it was just me enjoying it because I'm silly and also bisexual and I love 7 of 9. But this is another one, like, I rewatched so much of my favorites after my autism diagnosis. And I also have ADHD. And if nothing could summarize what it's like to have ADHD and be autistic at the same time, I think it is where the Doctor is like, that's fine. I'm just going to eat a whole bunch of cheesecake and drink a whole bunch of wine and there are no repercussions. And then 7's like, I hate you. Why do you keep doing this to me? And that in a nutshell is what it's like. Half of autistic people have ADHD. So there are half of us who, there's the meme that's like, inside of you, there are two wolves. Yes, mine are autism and ADHD, and they're fighting constantly. And that part was extremely relatable, especially like 7 was another character I identified with a lot. And just comments like, I decided I'd eat something besides your nutritional supplement that you eat because you refuse to just sit and enjoy food, which, fast forward to me today where I'm like, I have too much to do. I'm going to drink a Soylent and keep doing my work. I don't want to take the time to stop and eat. I do not care.
Brianne, I hate to break it to you, but Soylent Green is people.
Well, as long as they're vegan people, I can still stick to my diet, and it's gluten-free, and so it's allowed. But yeah, no, I always identified with Seven too, in which I think a lot of autistic people, especially those who realize later, going, "Oh, it's all of my favorite Star Trek characters, huh?" And then watching back now after Picard, where we find that Seven is also bisexual, I was like, she was a very important character for me. And sort of, her parents of the year taking her out for their Borg hunt.
They are literally the worst parents in Star Trek. I mean, dumb as a box of rocks and the worst.
Me watching it as a child, going, why would they take her with them? This is the Borg. As a kid, I'm going, what are they doing? I'm 8, but these parenting choices are not great. I know I'm 8, but I don't think she should be there. But yeah, especially coming from a home where it's like parents of the year, I always identified as 7, and I really like, you can tell I write a comedy because I like how silly this one gets at times. I really like getting the comedy and how well Jerry makes it where you can see when it's the Doctor, when it's 7, you can see who takes over when. It's so well acted. And when I had when I finally got DVDs of Voyager, when I would order those from some sketchy website when they were first available, that was one of my comfort ones that was often just background noise because it was fun. And EMH might be my favorite Doctor from the ships because he's snarky, and of course I'm going to like the one that is basically a computer program yet again. So yeah, that's one of my comfort ones that I find myself going back to rewatch more. Like if I'm going to watch an episode of Voyager, it's that one, and Bride of Chaotica is up there. And if I'm feeling super chaotic, I'll watch Threshold. I'll hate watch Threshold.
Hey, that's Emmy award-winning episode Threshold, and don't you forget it.
I was introducing my,
which is true.
Wild to be like, I've been introducing my girlfriend to Star Trek slowly, and she's working her way through Deep Space Nine. But my other partner and I were talking about Threshold, and she was like, "They did what? They did what?" And I was like, "Do you just want to skip and watch that one with us?" So she watched that, and she was like, "They did that. They did that in an episode, and they don't come back." I was like, "Nope." She's like, "All right." Like that's.
I predict we're going to see the lizard babies again. Lower Decks is going to do something with the lizard babies. I guarantee it.
Right for Lower Decks content. But yeah, that's just one of my comfort episodes I come back to a lot. And like watching it through a new lens of understanding myself better. It's like, yeah, half my life is just me getting upset with myself because my ADHD wrote a check that my autism could not cash. And I was like, I feel awful. Why did you do so much social stuff last week? Please let me hide in my room and draw.
The job that I have requires me to be on a lot of times because I do corporate training and development. So I have to run Zoom calls and do training sessions and travel around and do presentations in rooms full of people. And I dare say I'm pretty good at it. But one of the things is it sucks the life out of you. And at the end of the day, I'm done. I can't do anything else. And I remember I went on a business trip, and it was a legit business trip that I had to go to Hawaii and do training classes in Hawaii. And so I was getting up at 6 a.m. I was at 8 o'clock in a conference room, and I was presenting until 5 o'clock. And my wife came with me, and I would like drag myself back to the hotel room. And I'm like, I think I want a steak and a shot of scotch and go to bed. And she's like, come on, honey, let's go out. We're in Hawaii. And I'm like, I couldn't care less where we are. Like, I am literally happy right here.
Yeah.
I don't want to go anywhere. I don't like talking to you right now is a major, like I don't have the energy for that.
Yeah. So that's, yeah. For any listeners, being autistic is like a trip to the grocery store or talking to that neighbor who tries to talk to you every time you take the trash to the curb. Not that I'm referencing real life. All of those things feel like you're on and you're having to be on for a presentation. Like, all of the little social interactions feel like I have to be on for this or I'm going to be misunderstood. So having that sort of, like, my ADHD wants to socialize though. So that episode is just like, yeah, that tracks. I get why that was one of my favorites as a kid too. I was just like, I just think it's fun. I just go back and rewatch it. I don't know why I find it relatable, and now I get it.
Well, Brianne, we've talked about several episodes and what they mean to you. You've talked about how your autism diagnosis changed, how you thought about some of these episodes and how you've used some of Star Trek in your own life to think about how to navigate the world. My question for you is really, why does Star Trek matter to you? How has it influenced you? What's been the power of the show in your life?
Well, I think very similarly to your previous guest, who that was the only lifeline while they were in a cult. When I was in a fundamentalist home, Star Trek was my lifeline. And I would not be the person I am today if I didn't see people who were different from me, if I didn't see different points of view and different ideas and different ways of living, all portrayed through this one show. And I truly do not think I would be the person I am today if Star Trek hadn't let me see the world, even when I was, see all sorts of worlds, even when I was trapped in a place that was unwelcoming. So Star Trek made me who I am today. It gave me the capacity to become that person.
Well, Brianne, I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 has alerted me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Okay.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 just for you. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show. Are you ready to face the M5's Kobayashi Maru, Brianne?
As ready as I'll ever be.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulator and prepare to record Brianne's responses.
M5 working.
Question 1. Take a visit to a Federation world. Are we going to Bolarus, Beta Z, Benzar, or Barzan 2?
Beta Z.
Your favorite condiment you like to put on your gach? Heligian tongue sauce, squill syrup, yamak sauce, or Ketracel white hot?
Ketracel white hot.
What is your opinion on the admission of Corridan to the United Federation of Planets? Yes, no, or abstain?
Abstain.
You are sending someone to the Star Trek Agonizer booth. What episode is on back-to-back replay? Deep Space Nine, Let He Who Is Without Sin, TNG, Shades of Grey, TOS, The Alternative Factor, or Short Trek's The Trouble with Edward?
Shades of Grey.
Worst Star Trek convention cosplay idea? A gross of self-sealing stem bolts, a GNDN conduit, a fractured dilithium crystal, or an impulse engine?
An impulse engine.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru. Brianne, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, my friend.
Yes, thank you.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Brianne is awarded the title of head writer for the 24th century reimagining of Dixon Hill for the holodeck.
So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down. Thank you, M5.
Brianne, please tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can find your show, and if they want to take you to task or find out more about your experiences with Star Trek and continue the conversation, where should they go?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter and TikTok at the handle Hot Sauce Ghost, and I am on Instagram at the handle Brianne_Leeson. You can yell at my podcast's social media, which is all under the handle Lucky Winter Show. But yeah, I'm usually lurking around the internet, sharing memes, often Star Trek memes, and I will gladly discuss Star Trek with with anyone.
Brianne, thank you so much for being a part of Trek Profiles.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your kind communications of kudos, your cruel cannonades of communiques, or samples of your Trek/Fic to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it might be sent on a one-way ticket to the Delphic Expanse. This time, I leave you with a quote from the EMH, who in the episode Body and Soul said, quote, "The reports of my decompilation have been greatly exaggerated." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
So this is a bright spot in my day. I've had a very frustrating Star Trek day thus far. I'm going on the Star Trek cruise the end of the month, and today at 9:00 Pacific was when the artist events were going on sale to buy tickets. So like they host a wine tasting with Marina Sirtis, or whatever. And they send this email ahead of time and they're like, it will open 9:00 Pacific, 11 Central, right? So I'm like sitting in front of the computer, like,
yeah,
ready to go.
Yeah.
Ready to go. Like nothing happened. It literally would not open. And I was, I'm on Messenger with all the other nerds, and I'm like, yo, nerds, anybody else in? They're like, no. So finally they put up a thing, technical difficulties, we'll have to come back later. And I was like, very disappointing, very disappointing.
You already have your energy up to here, though, ready to...
I arranged my workday so that I would not...
Yeah, I would too.
And I was like, how dare you, sir? How dare you? So it's not been a great day thus far, but that's all right, because it's about to turn around, because I'm going to talk with you about Star Trek, which, how could that be bad?
I need to send you pictures of my collection of stuff, too. I was like, which
all
ones
of them.
do I go into?
All of them. Send me all of it. It's okay.
Because it is all over the house. I used to manage a comic book store, and we'd buy a lot of vintage stuff. So as you can imagine, if any Trek stuff came in, they're like, just put it in a pile over there for Brianne. It won't make it on the shelf. Just go put it in a pile.
Well, whatever you want to send me photos of, and literally, like, if you're in doubt, send it. So that's great that you didn't finish that episode with Bonnie. So this is like your first exposure to the Kobayashi Maru.
Yes, and now I need someone to go as self-sealing stem bolts.
So anyway, all right, yeah. So all of those condiments are actual condiments from the show.
Yes,
Halagian tongue sauce.
I remember seeing the Ketch Cell White Hot in Lower Decks, and I am a hot sauce fiend. And I would just post it, and I was like, I need it to be real. It would be so hot.
Oh, it's a possible licensing opportunity for CBS consumer products there.
Yes, I need it to be real.
Boom diggity, we're done.
Yay.
Was that okay for you?
Oh, perfect.
Oh, fantastic. Well, it's always important to me that my guest has a good experience on the show.
No, all of the stuff you do to prepare is actually accommodations that, like, one of my jobs is doing peer support for other autistic people. Preparing and sending all of the pre-show stuff, beautiful for autistic people. Wonderful. So helpful. I wish every show did that. That's what I do for my clients a lot. It's like, here are all my notes. Here's how everything goes. I just want you to know everything that's going to happen ahead of time. Super helpful.
I totally get it. I mean, I don't have a diagnosis or anything like that, but I always love to know what I'm supposed to do so that I can prepare. Right. And my wife, who's like, it's very funny. She's like the complete opposite of me in so many ways. She's very quiet. She never raises her voice. She's very, she doesn't like to be the center of attention. I mean, we got married. She's like, I'll be the bride. People are looking at me. It's going to be terrible. She's one of those. And so, but she works in a very razzle dazzle kind of industry. And so when she takes me to her work events, like she'll tell me like, can you please like go and talk to everyone and like engage them in conversation? 'Cause I really like that. And I'm like, okay. All right. So she'll like, please go engage and talk to everybody, especially talk to this guy and that guy and this other guy over here. I'm like, okay, I will go do those things. So I go and, act like a fool, and she just enjoys that, but that's just not her bag. So she asked me to do that. Are you poly? Is that what I understood?
Yeah. I have
okay.
two
So
partners.
is that what a polycule is?
Yeah, mine is unconventional in that my partners are monogamous. So they're not with each other. My girlfriend is a lesbian, and my husband is like, I am not a lesbian. So
okay. So they're with you, but they're not with each other.
They're not with each other. They call each other second best friends.
Oh, I see.
So
okay. I just don't. Yeah. I'm not familiar with all this stuff, so I thought I'd ask. I just wanted to understand.
Not indelicate at all. I try to talk about it as normally as possible because like some people do.
I get it. And I think that's one of the things that I'm a big fan of in Star Trek is this idea that it's this future where people can really sort of live a life however they want to live it.
Yeah.
And people can set up their world in a way that they want to have it, which is like, when you go back to TOS, one of the questions that I think you have to struggle with if you think seriously about Star Trek. I mean, there's some people who just watch the show, but if you really want to analyze Star Trek and sort of think about the Federation, one of the things you have to struggle with is if the Federation is so fantastic, why is it people are like, to hell with this, I'm going to go settle a new world somewhere.
Right.
Or like, I'm going to go be a miner out in Bumblescrew Alpha Quadrant, like on some terrible world, in the middle of nowhere. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
When the Federation is supposed to be so fantastic, right? And I don't think the show ever gives us a really good answer for that. You kind of have to make up your own
There's never a
answer.
Solid answer. Sometimes it's like, oh, they have these wild fringe beliefs, so they went off. And then sometimes, I want to say there have been a few times where it's like, we didn't get these resources we necessarily needed to do this particular project, and we're set on doing this, and they said, no, that's dangerous. Like, I can't think of anything particular, but you're right. Like, if the Federation is so welcoming and wonderful and post-scarcity and you live your life, like, why do you want to go live out on this mining asteroid that might erupt?
I mean, yeah. I mean, in TOS, you had straight up slavery, right?
Yeah.
Sex trafficking from Mud, right? To bring those women out to those miners who were living, in the middle of nowhere in like what looked like very rough circumstances.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to, think if you're trying to take the world seriously and and internally consistent, you have to come up with an answer for that.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things I really liked about the first season in particular of the Picard show. I had a lot of problems with it, but one of the things I really did like with it is that we got to see actual non-Starfleet people living in the Federation and to see more of what that is.
See more of what that's like, yeah.
And it's really different than what I think people would have expected.
Yeah. Like, I mostly enjoyed season 1 of Picard. Mostly enjoyed it. Season 2, I was like, why are you undoing all of these things I very much enjoyed about season 1? But one of the things I did like was getting to see the non-Starfleet life stuff. And it, even just the little slices of things were so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how does Picard have that chateau still with all of his like personal servants and I mean, people living there, I'm just curious how all that actually works. I mean, how does Cisco get a restaurant?
Yeah.
Right?
I thought about that. I was like, could I just go in and be like, jambalaya? And they're like, there's no transaction. How does the restaurant exist? How is it given to someone? How is it? So many, like, I don't know if I'm just hung up on the legalities of things. Like, this is post-scarcity and you don't have to pay for food. Then is this subsidized by the Federation that you are a place that offers? Like, I've thought about these things a lot too.
Like, what happens? So here's my own little like idea, right? Could like the people who work in the restaurant say, we believe that an Andorian fast food hut would be a better option in this particular location. And could they eject Cisco and turn the restaurant into an Andorian fast food hut?
Interesting.
Like, could that happen? Or could some local bureaucrat decide that? Or does he actually own it? And if he owns it, right, well, then that brings up a whole host of other questions.
Yeah, because that would make the restaurant personal property, because private property would not exist in the Federation. But personal property for a whole restaurant?
You sure about that?
Yeah, that's the thing I'm hung up about, too. Because I'm like, for a lot of this to work, it wouldn't operate that way. Especially because there's no money. So I'm with you. There's some things where I'm like, I would like to see more of how, as the kids say, the fully automated luxury gay space communism actually works when you're not someone who is in Starfleet. I want to see what it's like your day to day. I don't know. That would be interesting.
I am very much of the opinion that that is not the correct way to look at the Federation. There is no evidence that the Federation is any sort of political structure that would identify as communist.
Oh, no, I'm not saying the Federation itself would be. I think individual planets have their own ways of doing things, and
some might be. But certainly not the Federation.
The Federation
that's where
the Federation is too militaristic, I think, to really fall under that realm of things. Like, ultimately, they have such a hierarchy still that it's... Yeah, I think about the details of that a lot, and how it's not super consistent from Trek to Trek, because that's one huge thread of the world building that it's like, I need more details. Well,
that's one of the things I think that is so interesting, and I was just talking about this actually on my most recent episode that I've released as we record this with Rob Hedrick. In a lot of the new Trek, they've just sort of taken the eraser to a bunch of things that they'd previously established in Trek. So if you go back to that TNG episode where they're talking about, we don't eat meat in the Federation, right? It's all replicated, right? We don't actually eat meat. That would, and Keiko's like, people ate meat? That's unbelievable. And then we have Riker making artisanal bunny corn pizzas.
Right.
Right? That is kid shot with an arrow.
And you would think, of all people who would be of the, no, we don't eat meat, that Starfleet family would be like, no, we only do replicated meat, if that were the case.
Right, but here they are with the bunny corn pizzas, right? And so there's a bunch of things like that have been in the show, and that's just one of the examples that comes up. So I've come to the conclusion that, and I know this upsets people, but I'm pretty well convinced of it at this point, that Star Trek canon does not and has never existed. And it's really just a fan invention of trying to make sense of stuff that was never meant to make sense.
Yeah. No, and I think a lot of that, too, is a lot of Star Trek fan base is autistic, because Star Trek tends to be good about continuity about a lot of world-building things. And when there is some sort of inconsistency, I know my brain says, I have to make sense of this part here where I have no answers. And I need to use all of the other data in Star Trek to try to make sense of this part that I don't have an answer to yet. So I think that's where a lot of fans were like, well, if X plus Y plus Z from these different things equal the conclusion, that must mean Klingons have two penises.
Yeah.
Like,
which is canonical. That we've actually seen on screen.
Yeah, that was actually seen on screen. Yeah, but it's just like, we want to fill in those blanks and give answers to things. So, yeah. And then sometimes it's just, with all the realm of comics and novels and everything else, especially some of the comics where it's like, this person had not seen the show before they did this comic.
Those Gold Key ones? Oh, no.
No. And especially the UK comics. Have you seen the UK ones? The UK comics are even more wild. At one point, the Enterprise is like breathing fire. Scotty is blonde and super buff. Like, it was not...
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was being done, like, concurrently at certain points. And I believe most of it was put in newspapers, too. But a lot of these people had no clue. Saw maybe one episode, didn't really know. Some of it was going on, like, there's some wild stuff. There's a hardcover collection of the UK comics. There are 2 hardcover collections of it. I don't know if they're still being printed, but they're definitely worth checking out because there's some extremely, extremely silly stuff.
There's an episode that I have yet to record that's coming up here in a couple of weeks that I'm set to record with somebody. And when I asked them for their list, they put a bunch of Star Trek comics on there. And I found out that none of them are available in Comixology or in any of the online platforms. So I literally had to do the very old school thing and get on the old eBay and win them bidding wars, for some comics so that I could have them because I want to read or see or rewatch whatever it is that people want to talk about. So and they're weird, man. I haven't cracked them open yet. I mean, I just took a quick flip through, but they're weird.
Yeah, some of them get very weird, but I enjoy it.
What comics do you like outside of Star Trek?
I tend to do mostly indie stuff. I still run a book club for the comic book store I used to manage. I still get paid to run a virtual book club, and it's mostly indie books. A lot of my favorites come from like Image Comics a lot because it's creator owned. But if we're going into the big 2, if we're doing Marvel and DC, my favorite Marvel hero is actually Squirrel Girl.
Okay. Tell me about Squirrel Girl.
Squirrel Girl's big thing is that she has the powers of both squirrel and girl. She's got a big bushy tail. She is going to school for computer science. For a while, she's a squatter in the Avengers attic. Her family thought she might have the X gene, but they had her tested, and it turns out that's not why she has a squirrel tail and buck teeth. She just does. So no one knows why, but she's actually undefeated. So she's documented as having beat Thanos and Galactus and all of the big ones that all of the Avengers have failed trying to get before. So she gets the unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And most of the time, it's just her logicking her way through it. So with Galactus, she's like, listen, I know you're about to eat Earth, but but Galactus, hear me out. I broke into Tony Stark's, observation room to go take a look at other planets. And this planet is so rich in acorns that if I can get all the squirrels out of there, the caloric intake of this planet, you're going to be fine for a while. If you eat Earth, you're just going to be hungry in a couple hours anyway. And it's just right there. And that's how she defeats Galactus. It's just like, yeah, you're right. I'm going to eat Earth and my tummy's going to be upset. And it's just, I'm going to be hungry in a couple hours anyway. That's probably a better choice.
So by making reasonable dietary recommendations, you can influence the course of events in the galaxy.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Tell me about the weirdest premise that has ever been in a comic book that you remember.
Oh, God.
The craziest thing.
The craziest thing. I was just trying to untangle X-Men lore for my girlfriend yesterday, and that a lot of that stuff came up. There's a lot of stuff that they do in order to be able to start stuff all over again, because number one, sell better. So, God, craziest premise. Jeez, that's harder than asking me my favorite Star Trek episode.
I realize I'm putting you on the spot, but sometimes it's fun to find out.
I think in general, not so much the premise, but when they seem to be wanting to create new X-Men characters but are running out of ideas, you end up with ones like Gold Balls, which I was explaining to my girlfriend yesterday because we were watching the show Actually, and they were talking about X-Men. Gold Balls. He shoots out gold balls from anywhere on his body. Oh, also, it turns out they're eggs. And we can use the eggs along with the living island of Krakoa to resurrect dead X-Men using your gold ball eggs. And there's a lot of like early 2000s stuff with the ecstatics, like Zeitgeist, who was in the second Deadpool movie, actually for a very short time, who has acidic barf. There's an X-Men character who can turn into any flavor of ice cream.
And I wonder how that's helpful in a fight. I wonder
helpful.
I wonder how that works.
Not super helpful. I'll tell you now. It's one of the silliest books. So I think in general, some X-Men powers It's just like, you didn't need to create a new one. You don't always have to. You're not going to make your mark. You don't have to make new ones. It's okay.
I love it. I love it. I just had to ask you about that because sometimes you just come across the craziest stuff in these comic books, and it's just like, you think, are you for real?
Yeah.
Like, I think the guys who wrote that, or Lemon who wrote that, whoever wrote that, they had to have been baked, like completely baked.
And that's why most of the stuff from that I think is the wildest is probably from the 80s, and I'm just like, cocaine is a hell of a drug, y'all. You did not need to make a culturally insensitive character called Hemogoblin who, during the AIDS crisis, is spreading it. Like, y'all can chill out. Please stop making...
HIV?
Yes.
That's a superpower? He gives you HIV?
I forget everything Hemogoblin does, but... I have only seen a couple covers when we got a back issue of it, and it was worth quite a bit because it's like, hey, remember this terrible character they made? And that gave it value. I haven't gotten to read fully, but it was just the most tone-deaf, insensitive. We're trying to be relevant, but we've made something awful, awful, awful. But yeah, no, X-Men are
that's
wild.
Insane.
There's another one who learns he has the X gene, but his power is just to explode really big once and then die, so he doesn't get to use it.
He has a power he can't use.
Yeah, he can use it once. He has no regeneration. He'll use it once, and that's it.
Oh, wow. So he's like the last in reserve
last resort.
X-Men.
Yeah.
Like,
so, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
string 4.
There's so much X-Men content that I'm like, y'all... just tell a story. You don't need to make something new.